Spooked Scots. It was a foggy, moonlit night. Donald was collecting a goods train at the docks. He was just shunting the final trucks for his train when he heard a faint noise in the distance. "Oh, sounds like another engine," he thought. Then he heard the noise again. It sounded like someone was calling out to another person. "Who's there?" he called. No reply came. The fog danced in between his wheels. Suddenly, a loud splash sounded out. "Oh, was that an engine?" cried Donald. His driver and fireman ran out to see what had happened, but when they reached the end of the dockside, they were surprised to see no one there. The buffers were intact, the sea was calm, and there was no sign of an engine being there at all. Confused, they went back to Donald. "Must have just been a bird, Donald," they said. "That was nae bird," shivered Donald. "That was something bigger. I just know it." "We'll tell Sir Topham Hatt when we reach the big station," said his driver, and they headed off. When Donald arrived at the big station, he told Sir Topham Hatt everything. "This sounds very serious," he exclaimed. "I'll send out a rescue crew immediately." When Donald returned to the docks with Sir Topham Hatt, he saw Edward already there with the breakdown cranes and several workmen. As Sir Topham Hatt went to speak to them, Edward looked over at Donald. "You heard an engine fall into the sea?" he asked quietly. "Aye," replied Donald, "but I dinna ken where it went, or if there was any engine at all. The buffers didn't even have a scratch on them." "That's because the engine is a ghost," muttered Edward. Donald looked up. A ghost? You're not pulling my wheels, are you, Eddie?" "No, Donald," replied Edward. "It all happened a long time ago. A little green tank engine was shunting here at the docks. It was late at night, and his driver and fireman decided to leave him at the docks for work in the morning. They went home, but they forgot to set his brakes. That night, as he was sleeping, the little green engine started to roll forwards. He woke up and found himself heading towards the end of the docks. He begged and cried out for help, but it was no good. He rolled off the dockside and fell right into the ocean. He was never found. Buffers were put down to ensure this would never happen again, but many a workman will tell you that when the moon is full, they have seen the little engine roll into the sea, just like all those years ago. Donald was petrified and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. He was so scared that the following night he refused to take his usual goods train from the docks, so Douglas was called to take his place. That evening, Donald was shunting at Wellsworth when Douglas steamed in. "Looky here," laughed Douglas. "Seems like my brother's gone a wee bit soft in the boiler." "You wouldn't be laughing if you saw what I saw last night," shivered Donald. "Oh, you're just being a wee softy," retorted Douglas. "I'm nae scared of anything, nae like you wee pansy." "Dinna say I didn't warn you," said Donald quietly, as Douglas headed off to the docks. That night, it grew foggy again as Douglas shunted his train. "Ah, silly Donald," he laughed. "To think he of all engines would get frightened by a wee bit of fog. The lad's losing it, I tell ye." "Come on, Douglas," said his driver. "We've just got 2 more trucks to fetch, and we'll be on our way." Douglas looked up and could see his trucks near the shed that was by the edge of the dockside. As he headed over to collect them, he heard a faint puffing sound. "Who's there?" called Douglas. No one replied. Douglas puffed closer to his trucks. Then, ahead, he saw a green tank engine. "Percy?" asked Douglas. The engine didn't reply. Instead, it started rolling slowly towards the buffers. Then the engine cried out as though in pain. The noise was deafening, but Douglas was too scared to move. Then the engine rolled past the buffers and fell into the sea. Douglas's crew hurried to check on the engine, but when they looked into the sea, nothing was there. No one said a word as Douglas fetched the last of his trucks and headed quietly out of the docks, his face paler than the fog. When Douglas returned to the safety of the sheds, he rolled beside Donald and shut his eyes tight. Donald didn't have to ask anything to know what had happened. Douglas then opened a frightened eye when he thought Donald wasn't looking, just to make sure he would be safe that night.